Oh, hello there, and welcome back to Phil Talking 20. So, today's video, back to the me sat in my non-study gaming room without complicated kerfuffle going on about the Path Builder app, which I really enjoyed doing because it was really nice to be able to show that off. But today's video, more importantly, is about my campaign, my Roman Britannia campaign. I had quite a lot of nice comments on some recent videos, people mentioning that they had a vague and passing interest in my game and what I was doing. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about it, not too much because I want to keep my game separate. I don't want my game to become like the center focus of the channel because it's my private game, and it's my space where I enjoy the hobby with friends. So I'm not being mean, but it is nice to keep some stuff off camera, so to speak. But I'm going to touch on it, have a bit of a chat about it, and then discuss why and how you can do stuff with Pathfinder 2 or Pathfinder 1 and 5e and any other game system that you enjoy playing that doesn't have to be exactly as the core books of that system tell you. If you like the mechanics and the classes and all the other gumph that goes into that RPG system, you just want to do something new with it. So, where and when and how did it come about? It started because I listen to a lot of audiobooks via Audible. Other service providers are available. Again, hashtag not sponsored. But I have a lot of time in my current job to listen to audiobooks, which I really enjoy. And it started with a book called Vindelander by Adrian Goldsworthy, who is a historian and expert on the Roman army and Roman Britain first. That's his main job. He's a historian. And the title Vindelander is the name of a very famous Roman fort, or is it castrum? I think it's castrum in Roman for a fort. That's near where I used to live as a boy. And I remember going there as a child and being captivated by its grandeur and its size. And that's why I started listening to it. And it's a really kind of cool, intoxicating kind of look at Roman Britain, and the kind of the trappings of life as a Roman centurion. The main character Ferox, he is not a Roman by birth. He's a member of the Solures, which is a Welsh tribe who were a thorn in the Roman Empire's side for a very long time. But the story starts with him as an older gentleman making his way in the kind of what he believes to be the waning of his career and his life in Roman Britannia. And it really kind of struck a chord. The characters, the world, the setting. Do you know what I mean? I'm grounded in it because I, shock horror, live in the UK. But again, it was that kind of concept of the way that somewhere can as a setting can captivate you. I mean, you only have to look at the world of Galorian for Pathfinder to have all those kind of evocative kind of things that can grab your attention. And again, with D&D's wonderfully rich settings like Eberron and things to kind of capture your attention, that's really all you need to kind of jump into a campaign. You need that kind of, I suppose, narrative kind of fire in your belly to help you tell the stories of that kind of space. So Vindelander by Adrian Goldsworthy, if you're kind of keen to kind of get some kind of good Roman reading under your belt, highly recommend. I've also listened to, he's done 3 books, all stemming from Vindelander. The first book, Ian Ross, the Twilight of Empire series, set much later in the Roman Empire, because this is the other really cool thing about the Roman Empire. It's like 1,000 years or 2,000 years or of incredible history, where they literally changed the shape of the world and defined certainly Western culture to a huge extent. I've personally been to Rome. Whoopie-doo for me. But again, like breathtaking to kind of, to see Trajan's column, no puns intended. It's big. Trajan had a big column. Classic Roman smut pun there for people who like a bit of Monty Python. Romans, they go in the house. Yeah, that's a vague, obscure reference unless you know the movie. Now, having listened to lots and lots of books, audiobooks, and that was, as I suppose, the process that started me being really kind of fired up and captivated by that setting. But I chose to set myself outside those books. I chose to set myself up just before the Boudica Rebellion of AD 60, which, for Roman historical nerds centered on UK history, is a big deal. Boudica is someone that became a figure that became very evocative for Victorian Britain, confused with Brigantia, Britannia, as a concept, but that was the Victorians. They liked to make stuff fit their agenda, and the Victorians were very good at doing that. But that again is a whole different topic of conversation that we're not going to remotely get anywhere near. So, having been fired up by these books, why did I choose AD 58-59, just before the Boudica Rebellion? From my personal way of building a campaign and having a good idea about why it's worthwhile doing, it's important to have a reason for strife, adventure, and peril in your setting. It's not critical if you're wanting to not have, combat and classical, shall we say, adventure kind of games. But it's a useful backdrop to have something that is creating some kind of upheaval in the world. And it doesn't have to be too extreme, but putting it there meant I knew the Boudica Rebellion was coming. And what does that tell us from a narrative and a historical sense? It means that in the year 2, 3, 4 years building up to the Boudica Rebellion, unease, distrust, kind of aggravation, those kind of negative things, people kind of feeling that they're being pressured, people feeling that they need to push back against the might of Rome, is starting to brew and build. And that gives you lots and lots of avenues for kind of plot direction when it comes to kind of plot hooks that you can dangle in front of a party and give them something exciting to be involved in. Now, the first thing that's obvious is that Pathfinder 2 is a fantasy roleplay game involving magic. So why on earth would you use it to do Roman Britannia? I'm not wildly interested in being mega historical, super grim, super gritty. This is absolutely 100% a Roman historical Britain simulation game, because that's cool. You could do that by stripping out all the magic, get rid of all the magic classes, and really kind of boring into that kind of, non-magic, no, very limited healing, all that kind of stuff that would make that feel much more credible. I took the view of wanting a bit more of a, shall we say, like Roman, Greco-Roman kind of fantasy kind of vibe. Look at Homer or the Iliad. You got from kind of the Grecian tales, the tales of Hercules. They have in their folklore monsters, and they have supernatural perils in their folklore, and to an extent the Romans do as well. So there's no harm in not wanting to be super historically accurate. I'm even going so far as to be perfectly comfortable with my characters stopping the Boudica Rebellion if they push down on certain kind of narrative kind of points in a campaign, if they try and really drive an urge to try and head off the brewing kind of threat on the horizon, so to speak. Because Boudica didn't wake up one day and go, right, that's it, I'm going to go and burn down, you know, Chelmsford. You know, oh, I'm not going to go and sack Londinium. It didn't just happen like in the space of 24 hours. It would have been something that brewed and smouldered and simmered in its kind of plotting and its kind of, you know, the causes for it, the wrongs that felt like they'd been done to people, people's personal kind of honor being slighted, people sensing opportunity and starting to move pieces around to make something as big as the Boudica rebellion happen. And those are the kind of pieces that you want in a campaign to give you these mechanisms for the party to rub up against, to challenge, to be challenged by, and to overcome. So there is plotting, there is intrigue. The druids are on the rise, eager for vengeance, because the druids, from a historical perspective, have been violently persecuted by Rome. You know, you just have to look at the way that there is a very strong Celtic culture in Europe, certainly in Gaul, the Celts of Gaul. You know, that kind of which ironically very much connects into the Vikings, who survived the wrath of Rome, so to speak. That's where the Viking culture comes from. If you're a fan of the Viking show, you've got a really good indicator there of Celtic culture. And Gaul, Britannia, although it was probably called Albion by the locals, but that's just like, we're never going to know kind of territory, because again, one of the fun things about doing a historical campaign is we just don't know quite a lot of the time. We have these snapshots, we have this stuff that archaeology in the ground can suggest at, but it never tells us the reality of every individual person's day-by-day experience, which is where we as games masters and player parties have the opportunity to fill those blanks in and tell those tales, the same as authors do when they're penning their stories. So I've kind of got my now to touch on the framework, if you like, of structure. Sly Flourish, you may have heard of him. Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master is the book in question that he penned. He is a very notable member of the D&D community. He's had adventures published by Wizards of the Coast, and he's written his own adventures and his own books. The Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, the Lazy Dungeon Master being books that he's penned, where he has, with these books, created a really cool structure of how to kind of build a campaign. And one of the things he talks about, which I really like, is something called fronts. And fronts are essentially forces at play in the world. So to put that in context for my Roman campaign, my fronts are Rome and Rome's influence on Britannia and what they're thinking about, what they're trying to achieve, what they're there for, and they're kind of pushing to achieve, which is conquest. AD 58, AD 59, they haven't secured a huge amount of Britain at all. They're still furiously at war with the east of the country, and to an extent the north. They've only got as far as Lincoln, or Linden, as it's called in the north. You know, they've pushed out, I think, as far as Roxeter and Exeter towards the east, but they don't have any kind of claim to Wales or Cornwall at all. It's untamed. It's the edge of the world, at the edge of the Roman Empire. So you have this play space where there's peril and there's places of danger and adventure where they can go and fight the kind of the Celtic tribes. And then you've obviously got Boudica and her associates. She's a member of the Iceni tribe, based around where I live. And they're kind of obviously another force at play in my world. And then you've got the kind of the unaligned tribes. You've got the Solures out in Wales, you know, kicking up a right stink. And they're literally they drag Rome through a protracted 30 years of resistance. You know, they're serious guys, the wolf people, as they were known. Ooh. Now, with those kind of captivating names and those kind of ideas and concepts in play, much of which I picked out of these novels that talk about these people and the peoples and the Celts and give you an idea of a kind of a flavour of their culture, a bit more extended reading, a bit of Wikipediaing, a trawling through websites, thumbing through any books you might own can help you build up an idea of what's needed. I had to have a good idea about the structures within the Roman Empire. So how do legions work? Who's in charge of a Roman province? In this case, the Legate Augusta Proprietore, which is the title of the bloke who's basically the governor, if you like, of a region of a Roman Empire. Then you've got the tax collectors, known as procurators. You've got like sergeants and corporals within a legion, and obviously the sergeant kind of senior NCO kind of characters are centurions. You've got like your lieutenants and your lower ranking officers, which are known as tribunes, and there's a couple of types of tribunes like Tribune Laticlavia and stuff like that have their positions in the structure of a Roman legion. And then you kind of get all those kind of things in mind, and you have a chat with your players and you start kind of building where they fit in. So that's my backdrop, if you like, this Roman Britain kind of on the edge of something big, and it's brewing, and there's people plotting and first moves being made, early strikes, people testing kind of people's defenses, finding out how ready they are, how capable they are, people moving resources, getting their kind of weapons caches stowed ready for the big off, all that kind of stuff is all there to play with. But you could just as easily do what I've done with Rome, with ancient Greece. Obviously, you know, you're changing the names of many things, like weapons. So a short sword, what's a short sword? Well, quite often in the artwork, even in fantasy RPGs, they look a lot like gladiuses, don't they? So that's an easy one. What's a short sword? That's a gladius. I'm going to go and buy a gladius. All right, brilliant. Short sword, jobbed. Costs you X amount of gold, or X amount of sesterce if you're going to really kind of, you know, characterful and really kind of bore in. But you don't have to create whole new things to do this. They're already there. And the framework's already there. You know, a bow is a bow. The Greeks had crossbows, so, you know, they're there. You know, you can really nerd out and occasionally throw in a specific name, like a longsword, a very similar weapon to the D&D kind of Pathfinder-esque kind of classical D8 longsword in the core rulebook, is the spather, which is a Roman, you know, long-bladed cavalry sword, but effectively for when you're actually using it mechanics-wise at the table, a spather is a longsword is a spather. Call it a spather, but you don't need to do anything other than that. You've done it, you know. And even if most of the time you don't constantly bang on about it, you just kind of occasionally acknowledge that that's what it is, you're halfway there. And I think, again, with magic, I'm probably going to cap spells at 3rd level spells and not let them creep too much higher, just because I'm happy to have a bit of magic, because in the ancient world there was a great fear of magic and a great fear of gods and a great fear of the underworld and superstition. We know that from their stories. We don't know if magic was real. Let's be honest, it probably wasn't. But here's a really cool bit of historical kind of flavoured play and a reasoning behind me having some magic in my world. The Isle of Mona, which is Anglesey, as we know it today in the UK, was the last bastion of the Druids. And the Roman historians make a really big deal about the fact that during the Boudica Rebellion, they broke and destroyed and burned Mona. to destroy the Druids, because the Romans genuinely feared Druids and their magic. And whether their magic was real or not doesn't really matter. The fact that the Romans had a credible fear of the Druidic culture and the Druidic kind of strong links to magic and control of gods that Rome didn't like, and Rome to an extent feared, because let's be honest, the Romans had loads of gods. It wasn't like they didn't believe in gods and were like, oh, we have science to answer the questions of life. They didn't, they had huge amounts of knowledge and technology and an incredible volume of skills when it comes to engineering. You're going to have to look at Roman building and the sheer scale of the Roman Empire to see that those guys weren't playing. But they still had a fear of the unknown and superstition and all that kind of stuff to make low-level magic have some kind of element of credibility in your world from a perspective of misunderstanding, being tricked or confused, or letting your fear and your superstitions get the better of your rational mind. Now, many people don't believe in ghosts. Even today, however, some people do. And most people can say that when they've been alone in the dark, in an unknown or strange place, something has made them uncomfortable. The little kind of hair standing up on the back of your neck, the odd sound that you rationalize as strongly as you can is probably something normal, but part of your primal being fears. And that right there, even in our modern world, must have been 1,000 times stronger well before, all the way back in like AD 50, where we just didn't have science and we didn't have technology and we didn't have easy switch on and off lighting and all the conveniences and trappings of our modern world to answer and reduce the doubt of all that kind of stuff. But anyone who's been somewhere that's really creepy and scary knows that they've unnaturally experienced that and can't rationally just go, oh, it was just, this or just that. There is that subconscious fear. So don't kind of think that you don't have to have magic at all, especially if you've got someone that wants to have some magic. Monsters are another good case in point. So obviously the Greeks had cyclopses and minotaurs. You watch Jason the Argonauts and there's like undead skeletons and harpies. That's where many of the monsters that we have in Pathfinder and D&D come from our oldest folk tales. And again, there is an element of explaining, something that they've seen that spooked them, be that a costumed druid in the mists, who has scented the air with psychedelic, plants that have infused the smoke and the mist with hallucinogenic properties and made a Roman experience something irrational to a heightened level. Or did he really see an undead? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's two ways of looking at it. So although I'm not filling the world with roaming monsters in the way that you would with a classical Pathfinder adventure, where there are ogres down the road and giants up that hill and vampires in that old ruined castle, I'm still flavouring in monsters as part of horrible druidic ceremonies that have brought them into the world to punish Rome, or possible psychologically induced, manipulated experiences where the dead rise. All those kind of things where it has a bit of shock value and it has a bit of surprise value, and some really good, juicy narrative can bring something into a world that perhaps shouldn't be there, and certainly to the kind of the characters in the world shouldn't be there, but is, and is very much looming over them. Again, the Grecian tales, the Minotaur in the maze. That's a great example of you're doing an ancient Greek campaign, and the enemy have lured a Minotaur out from a nearby maze and set it on the town, and that's why the party of Grecian heroes have to face down a Minotaur. at level 3, or whatever seems appropriate and cool from a narrative perspective. Also, what it helps to do is break up the regularity of just fighting people, because it's cool, you can just fight people, but putting these little extra kind of spins on things and throwing in an ogre or what have you is definitely beneficial, especially when you're trying to kind of change things up and make things kind of, I suppose, mix nicely in terms of keeping people kind of entertained for the process of a campaign. So give it a go, get inspired, do some research, do some reading. You may already have a particular area of history that you know a lot about and the people at your table are invested and interested in, because that's another important thing. Throwing a Greek or Roman campaign at a party of players who love sci-fi and don't give a monkeys about fantasy or historical stuff, they're not going to be interested. I mean, they might be, but have the conversation, find out if they are. A spin-off from this conversation, that's something that's kind of re-perked my interest. I ran one-off sessions donkeys years ago where we would play the crew of a Lancaster bomber during World War II. And it was very simple. It was based around the framework of D20 Modern. And everyone would play a crew member of this particular bomber crew. And they would go off on these bombing raids, and it would be about, the kind of the pressure of being a team in a vehicle, surviving flak and night fighters and navigating your way to the target and, defending the bomber and successfully raiding the target and surviving to come home. And simple mechanics that I added to that was I had an image of a Lancaster, and it was gridded into 6 boxes. And whenever the aircraft got hit, I would make one of the players, I'd just choose one of the players, I'd say, you roll to see where the aircraft's hit. So that player would then have to pick up a d6 and roll that dice, hoping it didn't hit the section of the plane they were in, but also being worried that it might hit somewhere in the plane that was maybe vital, like an engine, or maybe one of their friends, like, the pilot might get hit. And then what we're going to do now, he's badly wounded. One of us needs to take his place. Someone needs to save his life and treat his injuries. So those kind of mechanics that you can bring to a game and have a loosely historical setting, don't be afraid to kind of try stuff and mix it up. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of an insight into my Roman campaign that I'm currently running, and I suppose it's some of my process about how I've constructed it. The bomber campaign, the reason I mentioned that, I just listened to Double Eagle by Dan Abnett, which is a 40k novel set in the Sabbat Crusade, and it's all about Imperial Guard and Imperial Navy fighter pilots and bomber pilots in this big air war against the forces of chaos. And it brought me straight back to that campaign where I ran the Lancaster crews, and we even did some like dogfighting with Spitfires and Messerschmitts with vehicle kind of rules, and dogfighting and dueling. And I thought, you know what, that would get me round the table. Bit of 40k air war. Oh, brilliant story, by the way. Another Phil recommends random audio books, all paperbacks if you go and buy a book and sit and read it. So there you go. That's my third recommendation of this this video. But yeah, that about wraps this video. Hopefully that's given you some kind of useful insights and some useful ideas about how you can kind of try something different and go outside of the typical 5e or 2e or first edition or whatever game system you're running's kind of system, and go, oh, could we do this with it? Could we do a World War II infantry campaign? Could we do, spies and sleuths surviving in occupied France? There you go. If you don't want something that's all action all the time, and you want something that's got suspense and tension and relies on a lot of sleuthing and skills to survive, I couldn't think of a better location than and resistance in occupied France or occupied Poland. That would be proper grim tension, nail biting, will my fake papers pass inspection kind of stuff. Now, could you do that with Pathfinder 2 or Dungeons and Dragons 5e, it would be a push, but you could if you really wanted to. You've just got to make it work. You know, and that's the thing. You can do what you want to do. Just think about it, be passionate and committed, tinker about with stuff, discuss it with people at your table, combine your ideas, scribble down a load of notes, get a good idea for it, then run it. You know, you only have to do one session. If everyone likes it, keep doing it. So any questions? Obviously, you know, lovely to hear your feedback in the comment section. Drop me a like, drop me a sub, and obviously I'll see you on the next one. Peace out.